Sure, thank you. Thanks all for coming, and thank you, Dale, for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. We just thought we'll have something that is broad enough for most people to relate to. So I'm not going to talk about the accounting code of ethics that Dale has been hearing of for at least 2 years. I don't mind you posing questions or stopping me whilst I'm going. I think the usual format is I have about half an hour to talk about my trolleys, and then we open it up to questions, but I am happy to stop if there is a burning issue that you want to raise in the first half hour. So as I said, I'll just go through some of the concepts and issues that have been bugging me around trolleys and the way they've been used. But before I do that, I know whilst they've been in my world for over 2 decades, not everyone has been dealing with runaway trolleys that are about to kill people. So I will spend a little bit of time explaining what the issues have been in philosophy and moral psychology, and then open it up and see where we end up. So I have prepared some visuals just because trolleys need pictures to understand and to share the insight. So I will share my screen. First, I'll put it on that. Okay, so that should be working. Okay, so we are talking today about frames, ethics, and trolley problems. And as I said, trolley problems have been used for a number of years. The latest version started in the 60s, but before that, philosophers for years have tried to understand how people make decisions. And fundamentally, the trolley problem is concerned with the ongoing distinction between 2 big classes of philosophy, moral philosophy, which has to do with consequences and duties. So if you've done any philosophy in your studies, you would know that all philosophical thought can be poured into 2 big barrels. One is we have to do what has good consequences, and the other one has to do with fulfilling duties towards others. So we are talking about teleology, deontology, consequences, duties. So
just a quick point. So sorry, have you got? Are you actually doing it in presentation mode, or are you actually purposely leaving it in just slide view? You might get a bigger screen.
Is that better?
A depiction. Yeah, that's it. So okay. If you've got stuff, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So the trolley problem fundamentally has been developed to look at how people assess consequences and what are the different variables we pay attention to when we assess consequences. So in its basic form, and of course there have been many varieties of problems that have developed and experiments that came out of the original sort of ideas. And I will go through just a couple, 2 or 3 of them to give you an indication of what we are talking about. So this is the teleology 101. So this is the basic and the original trolley problem. So the problem as it is posed is that there is a runaway trolley. It is going down the tracks. There are 5 people on the tracks. And there is a lever, you're standing on the side and you can divert the trolley so it can go on the side track. And instead of killing 5 people, you're going to only kill 1. Okay, so you can see the utilitarian calculus here. So the expectation is that many people will pull the lever and will save 4 people. So instead of killing 5, they will only kill 1. And so, you know, it's been used primarily in, it started in universities to teach people utilitarianism and making decisions that have the best positive consequences and minimize negative consequences. Another variety or alternative to this trolley problem is what we call the fat man problem. Okay, so here the experiment is asking people to consider this. You are sitting on a bridge, you are standing on the bridge, and there is a trolley coming down the tracks. There are 5 people on the tracks, and the only way to stop the trolley is to throw something heavy on the tracks. And the only thing that's heavy around you is a fat man. Would you push the fat man on the tracks? Right. Okay, so, I mean, it doesn't, I can see some of you smiling, and this is the effect it has, right? It's like it is so unreal and unreasonable that you don't really engage in a real moral judgment, and you don't engage with the issue seriously, but you may respond and you say, oh yeah, I may, you know, it depends on how fat he is, etc. But it doesn't really elicit deep reflection. So that is one of the issues that we have with the trolley problem, amongst many others. Now, between the first version of the trolley, okay, would you pull a lever, and the second version of the trolley, would you actually push a man to his death? You can imagine that we would have very different responses. And we know, even without the trolley problem, we know that we look at harming others or allowing others to be harmed very differently, both as an individual behavior, but also in how we assess other people's behaviors. So it is not equivalent. Harming others and allowing them to experience harm are not equivalent. And these, you know, the fat man and the first problem actually clarify that, you know, more people are more prepared to pull the lever, but very few people are prepared to push the man, which is encouraging in society. Now, the trolley problem was born in philosophy, and as moral psychology developed and ways of experimenting in moral psychology developed, moved into psychology, and there was a lot of research done in moral psychology, particularly with using MRIs to understand how our brain encounters the problem and responds to the problem. And as it started dying out, we had artificial intelligence and autonomous cars pick up. So the trolley problem found a new home into that space. Now, I know we are not talking about autonomous vehicles here, but it really bugs me that we talk about building ethical autonomous vehicles, because I think, you know, to my mind, this is an oxymoron. If we build them, they're not autonomous. In morality and in ethics, autonomy and moral autonomy is a fundamental characteristic of being a moral agent. And being a moral agent is what we need to have to be held accountable for our moral behavior. So here we are talking about autonomous vehicles that are built by, I assume, humans who are moral agents. So you can see here, we're not talking about autonomous vehicles, but we are talking about programmed vehicles, right? And I know there is a lot of concern and discussion around ethics in AI and in AVs, as they are called. But I think we are not looking at the right issues and the right problems, and therefore I don't think we are finding the right solutions. But I'll discuss more of that in a bit. So in autonomous vehicles, and I've given you some references if you want to go back and look at more literature on that. You know, generally the issue is the original trolley problem: would you kill 10 pedestrians or one? But there is the additional complication here, because if you are the driver, would you expect your car to protect you at the cost of a pedestrian? So in the first case, we have you kill one person that is on the side of the road instead of the 10 pedestrians that are crossing the road. In option B, you kill the driver instead of a pedestrian. And in option C, you kill the driver instead of 10 pedestrians. Again, a utilitarian calculus, but here we have self-interest thrown in that provides different motivations and different considerations. And of course, now we have COVID-19, and the trolley problem has entered the debate. And the debate with COVID-19, and it is a debate that we are hearing from our politicians, we are hearing from experts and non-experts. You know, there is this tension between people and the economy. And I won't refer to specific politicians like Trump or Boris Johnson or even Scott Morrison, but generally there has been this ongoing debate between, and the tension between saving lives and saving the economy, saving jobs as it is posed. And generally you can see that the trolley problem presents issues in that dichotomy. There is one or the other, and it's asking people to consider one or the other. And in that sense, I think it is actually counterproductive, and it actually damages our thinking, and it puts boundaries where we shouldn't have them. And I'll explain more why I think that. And of course, there is the other view, and this is again in relation to COVID. You can stop the trolley at any time, but doing so would disrupt the trolley service, causing the company to lose profits. So here we are not talking about how many people we can sacrifice, but we are talking about the dichotomy between saving lives and saving profits, which again is a new twist to the problem. So, and there are many, many other ways that the trolley problem has been used and is being used to get us to think and make judgments about options. But I think one of the fundamental issues we are facing here is that the trolley problem is creating frames and creating models that are not helping us make better ethical judgments. This is, I don't know if you've come across this. This is a letter, this is an article that refers to a letter that 265 Australian economists wrote to Scott Morrison, asking him not to sacrifice human lives so that the economy benefits. And they're saying that this is not an equivalent value. We're not talking about equivalent values, but also it is a false distinction. It is not true that if we open up if we sacrifice people and they die because of COVID, it is not true that the economy will be okay. So we are posing these false dilemmas and false issues in a manner that actually doesn't do justice to the issues themselves. So this is the beginning of the letter that the economists have said, and they're saying it is a false distinction. It is not it is not a choice between the economy and health. We do have to do both. Now, I am not saying that we are not facing ethical dilemmas and difficult choices. What I am saying is that a lot of the very difficult dilemmas that we face, and I'm going to use COVID as an example, are a consequence of a long line of unethical and bad decisions. So when we end up to the point where we have to pull the lever, we've already made a number of unethical decisions that lead us to a position where we have very, very limited options. And to explain that more, I'm just going to give you some information about what would have happened, and I'm sure you've come across some of that material in your readings. But what would have happened if we had responded earlier to the COVID crisis? And there was some modeling done, it has been published in Nature, that's saying that if China had, and this is not China bashing, we've had the same issues in the US and Europe and everywhere else, apart from Australia and a few other countries that responded very early. But in China, if China responded with the interventions that it imposed later, 1 week earlier, we would have had 66% fewer cases, and the spread would have been in 192 cities. It was the way it evolved, the spread was in excess of 300 cities. If we had responded 2 weeks earlier, we would have had 86 fewer cases and it would have spread to 130 cities. And if we had responded 3 weeks earlier, we would have had 95% fewer cases and the virus would have spread in 61 cities. So you can see that the decisions that were made from day one led us to different paths. And eventually, there was an avalanche of bad decisions that led us to the dilemma of how many people are going to die. But it doesn't have to be like that. And it doesn't have to be like that if we are prepared to listen to bad news, if we are prepared to respond to bad news on a timely manner, if we hear people that disclose misconduct or other unethical behavior. So there are things that we can do to prevent those sacrificial dilemmas, but we haven't learned and we haven't become better at doing those, at listening and making better decisions earlier. So what I want us to consider is generally, whilst different strands of moral philosophy have different views of what we should be paying attention to when we are making ethical decisions, I think all of them tend to agree that human beings have to be respected. They have an inherent dignity, and as a consequence of that dignity, they have to be respected. Even extreme utilitarianism that says, you know, is it okay to sacrifice one person to save the 5 or 10? In practice and in the way we assess that, that is not palatable, even by utilitarians. So we do tend to agree that human beings have dignity and are owed respect. Now, what does that mean for our decisions? And what sort of duties then do we owe people if they're all, if we need to respect all of them? There's been an ongoing debate as to how to treat people, and this is particularly relevant in the world of work. Is it possible for people to be treated respectfully and with dignity in the workplace? And if that is so, then what does it mean and what does it look like? The issue around humanizing and dehumanizing people. Dehumanization, we know what the effects are. And a lot of those trolley problems, you can see the way people are presented, even their faces have been dehumanized. And we know that dehumanizing the human face creates the conditions for riskier ethical decisions to be made. So, you know, these are some of the things that I think problems that are presented, as in the trolley examples that we've gone through, I don't think they're helping us in becoming better at identifying the issues and our duties in relation to the people that are affected. I think they're having the opposite effect. And these types of dilemmas, they're usually considered sacrificial dilemmas. So, you know, do you kill 1 or 5? Do you maim? Do you kill someone to take their organs so you can save 10 people? You know, those sacrificial dilemmas, I think they're counterproductive, because the context is unreal. And you remember when we started talking about the fat man, I mean, it was funny. It's just silly. Who would do that? You know, first of all, we don't imagine ourselves being in that situation. And even if we could imagine ourselves in that situation, you know, the notion that you'll find a fat man and push him, you know, first of all, I don't think I could. You know, it is just improbable. It is an improbable dilemma. And in that sense, it doesn't really elicit real engagement with the issues. And it doesn't help us to practice making better judgments and exercise, you know, build our moral muscle, as we say. But these sacrificial dilemmas, I think they actually limit the toolbox that we develop in terms of responding to ethical issues. In ethics, we have this concept of moral imagination, and I'm sure you can imagine what we are talking about here. We are talking about the ability to imagine ethical solutions in complex problems. But the issue, I think, is that both in the way we educate for ethics and we consider ethics, is that we tend to put and position ethics as if it is against profits, right? So, and I've heard a number of people, including people who teach ethics, that say, well, do you want it to be profitable or ethical? And I think it's really a sad state of affairs if in 2020 we are not developing, and we haven't developed many more ethical and profitable approaches to doing things. And I think that's a consequence of the separation. We've been talking about the separation between ethics and economics. That's why I stopped and I spent a little bit of time on what the economists were saying. Because unfortunately, we have had this distinction between ethics and economics. And the idea that in the world of work, anything goes, the rules of the game are different. You can behave in any way you see fit as long as you achieve your objectives. It's a dog-eat-dog world, etc., etc. I think we are getting over that distinction, but I think a lot of the fundamentals are still hanging around, and we are still saying it is either ethical or profitable or sustainable if we want to get into the sustainability and environmental issues we are facing as well. So the trolley problem that is used extensively, I think it frames issues in ways that are actually counterproductive. And we know that the way we frame issues, the models we use, the language we use, influences what we see, what we consider, and what we do. So we need to find better ways to consider ethical issues and dilemmas, but also develop our ethical thinking. And there are different ways. I've been doing a little bit of work on the indigenous approaches to ethics and the environment, for example, and you see how developed the imagination is and how they consider issues that spread boundaries, they spread time and place, and they have a notion of their responsibility that extends them, goes well beyond themselves, even their mob and their country. So there are ways that we can develop our thinking, and we can engage with traditions and stories to develop our thinking and our moral imagination. But we are still in that scientific, functional sort of approach that may not be conducive to that. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that we also need to pay attention as to who we put in the center of our frame or our model. Because if we put the organization in the center, we would see everything in a specific manner. If we put the employee at the center, we will have a different view of what the issues and concerns are. If we put the environment again. So we need to be very conscious as to what sort of a world we create, and for many of you who are involved in simulations and ethical games, I think that is a very serious consideration, because what you are emphasizing and what you are framing is going to impact people's thinking, perception, and imagination, and the decisions that they're going to make. So it is serious. And I think simplifying, while simplification can be beneficial, it can also injure our thinking and capability, human capability. So I do encourage us all to be more conscious as to what models, experiments, and frameworks we create. So I'm going to stop there because I do want to have a conversation, but before I open it up, I would just like to tell you about just 1 minute to spend on the game that Dale mentioned earlier. So Gillian, Dale, and I, and some other people have been developing a serious ethics game. We called it the Bogart Technologies. And it is a game that allows learners to actually immerse themselves in a work environment. They are subjected to pressures and expectations. They want to please the boss. They want to be liked by colleagues. So we created an environment where people make judgments in context and feel the pressures of that context. Because again, in terms of ethics training, one of the difficulties we have is that we take the person out of the environment, and in that sense, we are eliminating what we know is the key factor that influences behavior. So allowing people to be in context and be influenced, that enables people then to see how they behaved, and they're more likely in that sense to understand the influence and the pressure and how that affected what they did, and how they rationalized their own unethical behavior. So I'm just going to try to just give you a minute. Gillian is on standby, just in case I'm not the techie in this outfit, as you may have gathered. So Gillian is on standby. If I'm not able to do it, she's going to jump in. But I'll just share my screen that has a little bit of the game. Okay, let's see. Okay, Gillian.
I was going to say, this is going to be when it crashes for sure.
Help.
Can you just click on the interface? It should work. Or you might refresh your screen at the top. Let's see how that goes. Yep, that should work. The voice isn't working.
You probably just got your speaker muted on your computer, perhaps, or on the browser.
Yeah, on share screen, there's a little checkbox underneath at the bottom left as well.
Okay, I am trying. Wow.
As Eva's trying, you can, we sort of give an example from the game. So you actually play the game, and then in the 3 modules that follow from that, you actually interact with different aspects of the game or with experts in the area, and then it will, you have multiple choice or different questions that you need to answer. So I'll.
Does it work?
Still no sound.
No, Eva, I think you'll have to stop sharing and share again. And when you share, you have to click the little checkbox at the bottom left that says share my system audio or something along those lines.
It's really exciting if you could hear it.
Yeah. But it's been, we've just about ready to launch it, so it's pretty exciting. And with our pilot testing, you can really see people emotionally involved in the case, and actually quite anxious about what might happen to them in the organisation, if they'll get fired, if they'll end up losing their professional status, etc. So it's quite real ethical dilemmas that they're faced with. How are you going, Eva? Is it?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I think maybe we'll have a chance later on to actually go through it if there is a gap in the program.
Yep. Well, maybe I can put the YouTube link in the comments. Thanks for that, Eva. Does anybody have any questions for Eva?
Got heaps, mate, but I'll just kick it off, and then I'm sure others will come in. So first of all, Eva, a great presentation. I love the graphics, and in particular the one about bringing the COVID context into this whole thing. So appropriate, so appropriate.
Thank you.
The question that sort of came to mind through all this is, in the trolley problem, clearly there's a dilemma, and it's about making a choice. But it is also the fact that we're assuming a frame here that says we can't change certain things in terms of what's fixed and what's variable. For example, when we have to make that decision to pull the lever, we're assuming the trolley can't be stopped. We're assuming that it has to keep going, and typically that assumption, happens by default. We don't question that. Organizations make decisions based on short-term profits. We have to do this, and the milestones have to be met. And I think want to get your thoughts on that. How, from a systems perspective, if you actually look at the bigger picture and look at the whole of life construct and look at the future of the planet at the end of the day, the decision we make now will be a much more valuable decision in that regard than if we just considered the limiting immediate problem and the immediate consequences. It's about the other thing that came to mind over there, which you touched on, is the ethical element. And if you look at our governance frameworks and we look at legislation, it's fairly ad hoc. We don't have a holistic governance framework that, for example, considers by definition elements not just technical but ethical, social, environmental, cultural. You know, it's only if someone thinks about it we bring it in. Legislation is also, and I think I said this in the previous one, it's more a punitive after the fact thing. When things go wrong, then we'll penalize and we'll fine people and we'll take them to court and all that stuff, as opposed to building it in, to building the integrity in. So it's just random thoughts, but any sort of comments on that is, I mean, question the fact that we're assuming a frame and what's variable and what's fixed doesn't necessarily need to be so if we bring our perspective out to really look at the big picture. Look at the, you know, it's not about the immediate stuff, it's about what could happen in the greater sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think that short-termism that you've identified is part of the issue that we are trying to address at present, and it has dire consequences. But I think, and I agree. I think imagine if all these experiments with the trolley, instead of saying, would you kill one person or 5, we're asking participants to find an ethical solution to the problem where no one dies. Right? That's because we are asking questions that are not helping anyone. They are not helping us develop ethical theory, and they're not helping the participants in developing ethical capability. So the trolley problem has been used by hundreds of researchers and educators. And I think it is a missed opportunity. And not only is it inefficient, but I think it is harmful as well. The other issue you raised was in relation to legislation, and that's again, you know, it's a very big topic, the relationship between ethics and the law. And I would argue that we cannot expect the law to provide a comprehensive ethical code. It is a safety net. It is there to protect rather than enable ethical behavior overall. Although we are seeing a shift in legislation that goes into imposing positive duties, duties to do good instead of duties not to harm. That was the traditional mode. So I agree, but yeah, fundamentally, I think we are using frames and approaches that are not helpful. And why do we continue to do so? And there are better ways, why don't we? And I think this group here plays a role in that. How do we enable improvements in theory and practice and engage with ways that can be beneficial?
Thanks. Marcus here. I think the trolley problem and a series of other problems like it come out of psychology, where we base it on the ability to statistically analyze. So if I give you a binary problem, it's very, very easy for me to come up with a statistical analysis, and also then to take an intervention and show that you change your behavior in that binary choice. The problem is the world's not binary. And we've seen it from the modeling that's out there on COVID. Most of it makes me cringe. We've had, I think, 8 pandemics since I was involved with pandemics, and none of the previous ones are up there as a comparison, as a control. We're not looking at the what-ifs in previous ones where we were actually very successful in managing those pandemics. And we're not actually looking at the data from those previous pandemics either. We're taking very, very simple assumptions, and no one is declaring the assumptions. And I think this is a problem in simulation, is that we haven't understood assumptions correctly. We're not collecting them, we're not writing them down. It's qualitative, not quantitative, but it is actually the basis of all our work. And until we start to address those assumptions need to come to the forefront, we're not going to actually solve anything other than, I think, produce easy publications and easy things that influence people's behavior, but not in a way that is at all practical or real, it's just a motive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think, thank you, Marcus. I think psychology took the trolley problem and did different twists and turns with it. And I think the opportunity that psychology had was to actually look at the physical responses to problems as well. So I'm aware of some very influential studies, for example, that looked at, they did MRIs and they looked at what parts of the brain was actually lighting up with the different versions of the problem. And they were looking at how emotions play in responding to the problem. But I agree with you. I think we all have a responsibility to look at what we are doing. And, you know, I think even benevolent paternalism is problematic. So even if we are having positive impacts, you know, to what extent are we doing that whilst respecting the person? Because a positive, you know, I think autonomy and freedom are fundamentals of humans and the rights of humans. So with simulations and, you know, another area that has evolved a lot is, you know, nudging and how we can nudge people to do the right thing. We can nudge them to pay their taxes and stop smoking and stop, you know, limit their drinking. But you know, at what cost and how do we balance? And these are all very big questions that with our actions and behavior, we are actually affecting other people. So, you know, that has responsibilities as well.
I suspect in the trolley problem, if we were to do it for real, so do a physical simulation of this with mannequins or models that look like real humans, you would get most people not responding, which is interesting because most people will pull the lever in the first part of the problem if they're given it as a theoretical. And the reality is this: I've had two incidents that have persuaded me to this. One was with scouts, and we were going through decision making and ethics, and the one person who was really poor at having what we would call rational decisions and ethical decisions was the only person to react during the weekend when we had two minor disasters occur. And everyone just sat back and watched. And he got up and actually acted and did things and was quite heroic. But it was really interesting because if we would have modeled him as the poor ethical decision maker, and yet none of the others had the ability to act. And a second example was with a group of executives, all very highly trained in ethics, on a retreat where we were looking at decision making and ethics. And during all the problem solving, everyone had the right answers until someone acted in a way that another member thought was unethical. And it was interesting, everyone jumped to the defense of the person who had acted poorly. Mm. So it was really, really interesting that we were talking about ethics and behaviors, and people knew the difference between how to socially answer compared to how they actually behaved. And it certainly changed my opinion of many of my peers that they weren't really at all interested in solving the problem. What they were interested in is having the status associated with it. So I actually think the problem when we move into simple models for decision making is that people can learn the rules how to behave to look good, but it has zero impact on how they actually behave in the real world. And
totally agree. Yeah,
that's why we need to get to simulations that is appropriate for the particular task they're doing. So if you're doing an ethical one, you need to have people have skin in the game. They've actually got to have something that they lose as a result of it, not just a perceived one, because we notice that the difference between students doing it, where there is a perceived one, there is the view of my peers, am I going to be more successful than my peers, compared to a work-based one where it's just a game. So if you don't have that commitment, the game won't have the effect that you expect.
Thank you. And just to extend that a little bit further, the issue we know is with ethical behavior, particularly at work, is not that people don't know what the right thing to do is.
Sorry, Eva, your audio just dropped quite a bit. I don't know if it's just me.
Is that better? Okay.
Better.
So we have a lot of research that very clearly demonstrates that the problem with unethical behavior at work is not that people don't know what the right thing to do is, but they don't do what they know is right. So if we are going to spend resources and time and energy in training people up, trying to train them in what is right and what is wrong is not efficient, because that is not the issue we are facing. The issue we are facing is that people go into a context and they don't behave in accordance with their own values, and they don't do what they know is right. So these are very different issues that we need to solve. But most of the training modes around ethics is, okay, we'll give you, we'll sprinkle a little bit of moral philosophy, and then we'll give you some dilemmas, and okay, what should Mary do? What should John do? And we'll make sure that everyone does the right thing. But that doesn't translate, like you said, it doesn't translate in doing the right thing when you are faced with the issue. And there's also been done, research has been done on people that study, and they're experts in moral philosophy, and they're found not to be more ethical than everybody else. So knowledge and insight doesn't make you a better, a more ethical person.
I think conflict avoidance is a major driving factor in human behavior. Your willingness to stand up is going to predict your ability to act ethically. And yet none of our games seem to be designed around that. How do I deal with being very uncomfortable?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a part of the problem, is that if we tell people the assumption is we're going to make you uncomfortable, we're going to put you in a situation where you're going to be wrong, no one wants to really play that game.
Well, that is what our game is doing. It is pressuring people, and it is measuring people in ways that are quite similar to being at work. And the feedback so far is that people do feel that it is work, and they have been pressured, and it's only later that they realize what was happening. We have had a number of people tested, and we haven't had, we've had very positive feedback in terms of how people experienced the pressure and how they were able to reflect and learn from it. It is still early days, and part of this project is to actually do research on that and get clearer insights into what is at play. But so far, it has been encouraging.
I think in relation to what Marcus said, a lot of it's you're conditioned by society. By the time you grow up, you have seen so many people get cut down for taking action that you just can't do it. And even you see heroes, like they do really good things. There was the guy who stopped the WannaCry virus. 6 months later, he was arrested by the FBI because they dug stuff up that he'd done sort of 10 or 15 years before that. So, and there's plenty of examples in life where heroes will step up and do something, then all of a sudden the media, all these people start digging through everything that they've done. And I think that must have some sort of effect on us all, so even if it's subconscious, like we're just getting conditioned to not take action.
I've done quite a bit of work on whistleblowing, and I think maybe later in the year we can have a discussion on that. But in what we know, for example, for people that blow the whistle, in most instances, it is not that they are petrified or they're afraid to blow the whistle. In most instances, they don't disclose anything because they know they will not be heard. They're wasting their time. So we do have insights around when do people speak up and how. So that is one point that we can sort of expand at on another occasion. But the other issue I would like to raise is that I forgot what it is, but it's we don't have. I don't think we can move forward if we have to rely on heroes. I don't think we should create environments where you have to be a hero or a saint for you to do the right thing. And that's why I think the the governance infrastructure, the demands, the pressures, the rewards, they all have to be aligned. So doing the right thing is what is expected and what is easy. So if we need to have, superheroes to have ethical behavior in organizations, we have very big problems.
I think that's actually very difficult to expect, because normally in complex systems, when things go wrong, it's not a single thing went wrong, it's 200 or 300 things went wrong, and the consequences are absolutely huge. So Queensland Payroll would be an example of that. $40 million project that had to happen because the previous payroll company had gone bankrupt. So it had to be replaced. It cost $1 billion to bail it out. Now, there were people putting their hands up throughout that saying this is not going to work. The reason they weren't listened to is that no one could cope with the concept of it not working. And when it didn't work, the fix is $1 billion. 300 staff put on just to man the telephones, more complaints about the new payroll now that it's fixed than the previous one, even though it works better. So the reality is individual tolerance in complex systems and understanding is so poor that you are never going to build a system where it's transparent about what to do, and it's only going to be heroic action that will ever be able to stand up and do something about it. And in the payroll case, if people had gone to the media there might have been a chance not to spend $1 billion. But the reality is that they would lose their jobs because people would lose trust in them, they'd lose their ability to be promoted. And that's the reality, because I can tell you there are many times I've seen people blow the whistle and they're being wrong.
Yeah, and
absolutely wrong.
It is a very complicated issue, but I would also like to say that by its very nature, the cases of whistleblowing we hear are the ones that didn't work. Because people disclose many issues every day and we don't hear about them. So by definition, I think the types of cases that come to light and we are aware of are the ones that were ineffective. But there is whistleblowing that works, and there are people that are listening and issues that are sorted.
I think there is. And in health, we have something called graded assertiveness, the concept of if you think something's wrong and unsafe for the patient, you need to speak up. However, I have seen, firstly, I've had the experience of teaching this for years and then not being able to do it for my own daughter. So I did the first 2 levels and she almost died. So it's not easy to do. If someone is in a position of authority and reassures you that it's okay, you find it very hard to challenge them. But I've also seen the other case where a midwife pushed an obstetrician out of the room because what he was doing was unsafe. And it turns out what he was doing was perfectly safe. The mother lost all trust in the healthcare system, the midwife, and the obstetrician. And so the problem is we're dealing with complexity. None of us know it all. And so when we talk about successful whistleblowers, they had an insight that others didn't, and people listened to them. But we don't ever talk about the false whistleblowers. We don't have.
No, we do. We do a lot, and we talk about whistleblowing that is about not about the public interest. It is about personal grievances. And there are many, many types of whistleblowing, and there are many, many motivations, and there are many, there is effective and ineffective. But I think we have concentrated a lot on the whistleblower, but we haven't concentrated enough on the recipient. I think now we are moving to a space where we are imposing certain duties to the recipient of the disclosure to listen and do something.
Okay. All right, I'm going to jump in.
But we need to, I think we are moving into a different, Marcus, I think we have to continue I'm happy to have a chat at any time about whistleblowing.
I saw Nick try to jump in a few times. Did you have a question or comment, Nick, to finish up on?
I just wanted to say that I think the challenges you'll face trying to change society in that way is based on two core forms of friction, really. One is status-driven friction, and the other one is the friction of effort. So in either case, like even in the simple example of the trolley problem, right? You're still part of society. So even if I go and flick the switch and kill one person, right, my public status is now being affected, and that's why in a conversation I can answer it one way, but in reality I'm going to do a completely different thing. And then you've got the friction of effort. Like if I go to that effort, what's it actually going to do to me, right? And then when that transcends into your workplace examples, right, you've both got the effort of actually either whistleblowing or pushing someone out of a room or whatever it is, and the status-driven friction that gets added to that as well, like what's actually going to happen to me, my family, and my ability to earn after that. And if you can't set up a framework for society to operate and remove some of those frictions, particularly the friction of judgment, then that's why the majority of humanity is not going to bother taking part in these things. And I would suspect that's why in most of your tests you find that, because those two frictions are too high for most people.
Okay. I think that was a great comment to end on. Perhaps, Eva, we could book you in again for a whistleblower-specific session in the near future.
Yeah, I think that has, and given the work that many of you are doing, I think it will be a very interesting discussion. But yeah, I have done quite a bit of work on whistleblowing, and it is complicated. I'm not saying it is easy, and unfortunately, we still see whistleblowers suffer a lot of detriment. So there are major issues there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'd like to thank Eva, and if you can join me in thanking Eva for today's session.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming along. It was our best attended session, I think, since the first or second week. So it just shows what an attractive topic and host we had.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I think there is a lot more to discuss, and thank you for your comments. Very helpful. Thanks.
All right, thank you all. This will be recorded. I'm going to try to get all these online this weekend, finally. And next week we have Andrew Siderhelm, who works for the Australian Federal Police doing serious games. And he'll be talking about the hype of some of these technologies, including VR, and how they can be overhyped and what the issues are with that. Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you have a great weekend. See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks, Dale. You too. Thanks, Eva.
Thanks, Eva.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.